And also civil rights. They allowed, these were not white only unions like most of the craft unions were. They allowed people who were not white, people of different color skin into the union. And so they would be fighters for equal rights. And they also want the women's right to vote. And there was a big disagreement on that. A lot of labor unions wanted no women labor at all. The same reason they didn't want child labor. For your women in the workplace, for your workers, they thought would raise wages. It's more complex than that, especially when the kind of jobs they were competing for. Also in child labor, as we mentioned before, that in child labor, that raises wages. They also want government regulation. And they want government regulation in a lot of different things. Worker safety, home safety, a number of different things. They even were talking about something brand new, this idea of something called a minimum wage. Don't forget, the wage is so new. They wanted that, but they wanted antitrust. Remember, trust is synonymous with monopoly, so break up monopolies. You break up monopolies, it raises wages. It raises wages. But they were very fearful of strikes. They wanted something more like a political party, like a labor party that was forming at this time in Great Britain. The United States has never just had a working man's party. I'm using that generic man. That's really what it's called at this time, but for working people. And the Democratic Party came close a couple different times. Early Jacksonian democracy, and then in the 1930s to the 1970s. It was much more of a working person's party. But they were scared that if they strike, that will give an excuse for the powers that be to send the police and destroy them. They were terrified of this. Partially because look at their ideas. All of these were supported by a number of different people, but this cooperative system kind of sounds like what? Yeah. In fact, moderate socialists believed in all this stuff. Moderate socialists did. But they were very similar to socialists. In fact, a lot of the leaders were moderate socialists. So they wanted socialist solutions. An 8-hour workday or civil rights were socialist solutions at this time. Now, don't get bogged down. Oh, it's socialist or not socialist. I mean, these labels are, I'm just talking about what were solutions offered by socialists at this time. And that's the Knights of Labor. The other labor union, craft unions, were forming around the American Federation of Labor, Samuel Gompers, and yes, I agree. This Boilermaker would be the head of a craft union, has a great mustache, and Gompers would make another fine name for children's. Do you agree? Little Gompers. And so with that, this is a craft union, yes. Just abbreviation. But at this time, no one ever said AFL. They always said AFM. And then when they unified with an industrial union called the CIO in 1955, that's when it became AFL-CIO. And in fact, my labor union is in that. That's our umbrella union. And what this was is a federation of craft unions. It was a federation of trade unions, and they were almost all to a member white men. They did not allow people of different color, not allow people of different sex. Almost completely. Not always, but almost completely. And they saw themselves as pretty elite. And they basically accepted the system. So they accepted the wage system. So they accepted capitalism on its basic premise. But they called it bread and butter issues. So we want a little bit better life, a bigger piece of the pie. And I put a few of them down. You notice it's very similar to the Knights of Labor. They had the same basic argument. So their arguments weren't a heck of a lot different than some of the moderate socialists either. But they said, okay, we accept capitalism. We know you're going to be on. We know the profits will focus there. We just want higher wages, better conditions to get our piece of the profit. And they believed in collective bargaining, and that means they're going to strike. And these craft unions would strike almost constantly, it seemed like. It's kind of amazing. In these 30 years, these are garment workers in New York City. There's going to be 24,000 strikes. No country in the world had more strikes, or for that matter, a more violent reaction by the employers and the police than the United States. And I love this picture because it shows garment workers working in what are called sweatshops. So we know the term, we'll talk more about it next week. But they're from all over the world. These are immigrants, American citizens, but they're from everywhere. Look at the different languages. I love that. And if you go to New York City, you know, all these people coming in there, incredibly hardworking, working for a better life, but it's going to be very violent. Now, which of these two labor unions would employers, and therefore the politicians who get their money from the employers, would be most fearful of? They don't like either one, but which one do they dislike the most? Yes. That's a very good answer for the striking all the time. And they hated that. That's why they hated them both. But there's something else, yeah. Yeah, the Knights of Labor, though, wanted to throw out the old system. And that's the big element. But you're not wrong. That's why they hated the NFL too. But they were fearful of the Knights. The Knights had over 1 million members. Now, both sides wanted an 8-hour workday. And the Knights were pushing, or the AFL was pushing for a general strike, where workers just would not show up to work one day and push for an 8-hour workday. And that's going to be called, we lump it all together as the Haymarket Affair. On May 1st, a general strike. Over 1 million workers didn't go to work on May 1st for an 8-hour workday. But the Knights didn't want this general strike. And so they went into battle with the AFL, who wanted it. The Knights were saying that the police will use this as an excuse to destroy us. They know how much they're hated by the powers that be. But there was a general strike. Over 1 million came out. Over 1 million people came and watched these strikes all over the United States. And in cities all over, the police came out and attacked them with their day and their nightsticks. You know what a day stick is? That's maybe not what a day stick is. You know what a nightstick is? So you see the baton the police wear. Now they have a retractable baton, where they flick out and kind of flick their wrists. A day stick is something else. Yes. They were not being violent. They just pure intimidation. They were ordered. A day stick is stick about this long. It's a big baton, and they keep them in log cabinets in the big cities. So the idea is, you know, they're the ones, if you ever see riot police, they're that big, which riot police, whatever you said riot police out, you're guaranteed riot. But tensions go up, right? But they're in these big cabinets, and they're like big bats. When I was in New York City last summer, I mean, I was walking through New York City, walking through this park, and there's a big cabinet with NYPD on it. And I'm like, day sticks. And they let you go out and play with them. But they're there. And 14 people were killed in Chicago alone. And in furious about police violence being used to stop labor unions, basically because they disagreed with their political point of view, a rally was planned 3 days later on May 4th, a Sunday. Oh, almost forgot one thing. I'll go back. But May 1st. So this is going to become known all over the world for this general strike. And beginning in the 1890s, this is going to become their Labor Day all over the world. People are going to come out and march on May 1st. And May 1st is going to be a labor workers' day. In countries like the Soviet Union, this will be their biggest celebration to the end of the Soviet Union. First. When the United States finally gave workers a day off called Labor Day, that was just a day off. The United States very defiantly said, we won't do it on the same day. We're not going to give you your Labor Day as everyone. And so that's why they would choose the first Monday after the first Friday in September. That's when Labor Day is. So back to this. So the plan was for a rally May 1st, and it was anti-police violence. And they were going to have a march and then go to this Haymarket Square, which is a big square park right near the lake. And it was going to be, families would be there. There'd be bands, speeches, kids would be there having a picnic. I mean, it was like a big affair. And it was meant to be more than just a rally. It was by no means violent, but it was immediately surrounded by police. Oh, I like this poster. Here's another one. The mass meeting. To talk about this. This is to talk about this rally. And I like so many German immigrants. In the United States truly is this hodgepodge of different people. But it's at Haymarket Square, and the police surrounded. There was yelling, and once the police arrived, tensions rose immediately. They're scared of what happened on May 1st. Somebody rolled like one of those cartoon bombs, like a round bomb with a fuse, and rolled it into the police officers, killing 8 of them. Here's a picture of the police officers. There used to be a statue there, but it became a target for attack, and so they moved it to the police academy in Chicago. But who's doing terrorist attacks? What group? They're bomb-throwing anarchists. They don't know who did it. But they arrested 7 prominent anarchists and accused them of murder. And yes, they would be condemned. No evidence at all. But here's the thing. What they claim is this is an anarchist attack. And what it means are those people who want an 8-hour workday are a bunch of bomb-throwing anarchists. And that means that the labor unions are bomb-throwing anarchists. And they knew the Knights of Labor didn't want this, but that's who they blamed. This would be used to discredit the Knights, to claim they're a bunch of bomb-throwing anarchists, and the Knights never recovered and disappeared. Not completely, but it would disappear. Eventually roll into this union, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, called the International Workers of the World, obvious. But the media portrayed this narrative, even though there was no evidence that the Knights had any anarchist leadership at all. The Knights had anything to do with this bombing. They didn't even want the rally on May, or the march on May 1st. They spread news that it was anarchist. And think about it, you're in Helena, Montana. Little tiny town in Montana, it's about ready to become a state. And you get in the newspaper and said, anarchists are the Knights of Labor. Huh. Must be true. People read it, it must be true, right? And they spread that narrative. This would never happen to them. If people just spread information on it, they would look into it and know the material. That's my way of lying. I can't tell you how many old people, aka people like me, who get all their news from Facebook and in 99% garbage. Yes, I'm one of the rare old people who do not. But it seems like everybody I know, like, oh, I saw it on Facebook. Okay, but here it is, anarchist meeting at Lakefront. They weren't anarchists. That was a rally. It was not this at all. You can say, I don't agree with their political point of view, but this is a lie. Same thing here about, look at the, and they show like, nine, this beer, you know, it's a beer. Not a nice trim beer, the long, scraggly beer, like a radical. Like maybe one of those foreign immigrants. We saw them. I showed you those lettering, right? A foreign radical coming into this country. It worked quite well. They're a bunch of bomb-throwing anarchists. So look at the evil face. Dark. But they're already kind of picking people up by color of skin. Look at them with a scraggly beard. European anarchists sneaking around the brand new Statue of Liberty, which came from Europe, but that's another story. And the big thing was, this would allow for this concept of, it's radical immigrants are coming into this country and doing this, these radical immigrants, pushing this idea of nativism and this other coming in, other people coming in. This should remind you of the anti-Catholic bias we talked about earlier. But now think of all the new immigrants coming in from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. Many of them are Eastern Orthodox, or a lot of anti-Semitism. They're Jewish. And this weird thing, either this weird prejudice against Jews, where either they're radical socialists or they're bankers controlling all the money. And you might think, wait a minute, aren't those opposite? Who cares? You know anything about that ideology, it fits right in. So here is, keep out the dangerous radicals. We need a wall. people think the illusion of walls was new in 2016 with Donald Trump. No, it's old. And same thing. Look at all these immigrants. Look how they draw them. Anarchists. Here's an Eastern socialist. And, Italian. Oh, there's the Italian immigrants. So this leads to a lot of nativism, and this we use also to discredit unions. Who remember those unions? Remember I showed you those pictures? Foreign radicals. So at that, click, click. After World War I, the bomb-throwing anarchist trope would go away, and it would turn into a Red Scare anti-communist. Because now we have a government taken over by, we say, first they claimed to be communists called Bolsheviks, and it was anti-communist and it would be used against labor unions. Because, well, the monstrous state that this guy would create. Who's this guy? Stalin, yeah. And unions would be destroyed for being communist in World War in the 1920s. So with that, let's get to a couple very quick. Oh, and it'd be used in the civil rights movement, the same thing. I want to keep the idea that this bomb-throwing anarchist thing would not be like forgotten or relic of the past. So let's talk about this is 1963 in Alabama, and as we all know, remember I told you about civil rights? Yeah. And then here's Martin Luther King at communist training school. There were billboards put up all over the United States with this picture. Was he in communist training school? No, that's garbage and made up. But it's quite effective, and they're still happening today. Yes. Well, Montana has it kind of feels very southern here too. I mean, this is not actually they just stuck in Alabama. It could be here, it could be any number of places. My point is I don't want to just pick on Alabama. Okay, I enjoy picking on Alabama too, but unfortunately, it's not just in Alabama. And then, of course, as we all know, when we had COVID, no, it gets even better. The mortal enemy of the communists, and we'll talk more about them later, is a group called the Fascists. They are mortal enemies. How Nazis could take power is by saying we will beat the communists. So this is my next video. Same person. So that's communism, but that's fascism. That's how you tell somebody doesn't know anything without saying they don't know. Okay, moving on. So how they would fight unions. Unions be pretty, intimidation is the most basic one. You want to start a union, you're fired. Amazon fires people. Right now. Technically it's illegal. Starbucks is doing it. If everyone start a union at Starbucks, gone. I mean, gone. But another thing they do is a lockout. A lockout is where you close your company and say, if you want to come back to work, get rid of the union. Now, I know you're thinking, wait a sec, the company won't make money while there's a lockout. But they figure in the short run we'll lose money, in the long run we'll make money by not having any union.
But basically it's a reverse.
Yes, it's a reverse strike. And there's a lot of these. There's a lockout right now in coal mines in Alabama. We're back to Alabama. I didn't even realize that. Yeah, almost over a year, miners have been locked out of a coal mine because they demanded. To me, it seems like very minor safety considerations. Scabs. So scabs are what unions will call strikebreakers, and strikebreakers are brought into work. They might not be as efficient, but the whole idea is you strike, will bring in other workers. They would bring in like immigrants or people of different color. I remember 1987 when the NFL went on strike, the workers went on strike, and they brought in like other players. They ran scab games for a while there. And that was just kind of a surreal thing in 1987. Yeah, 87. 82, they just canceled the season for 6 weeks. Yellow Dog contract. Hey, there was a baseball lockout and they didn't have a World Series 20 years ago. No World Series. Yes. Well, what it means is here is, this is what the unions call it. And a yellow dog's a coward. And so it's saying that companies are coward for giving their conduct. So that's why everyone, they all know it's a yellow dog. Here's another example, blacklist. Anybody troublemakers who try to start a union can't get another job. Here's another one, Pinkertons. Remember we mentioned Pinkertons during the Civil War? These were private investigators. They would spy on people who try to start a labor union, or they'd be used as thugs to break up labor unions. So they'd be used as armed thugs to stop unions. And the big thing is, though, they would hire a Pinkerton who would be working next to the workers and just kind of follow them around to listen to who's trying to start a union. In fact, what they would do is they would hang around bathrooms, just hang out in the bathroom. Because that bathrooms where people think they're kind of safe and they'll not talk. So they listen. By the 1920s, like companies like Ford would bug, they wiretap bathrooms. And that should sound disgusting. Amazon, they've found them wiretapping that just recently. They try to break up meetings. Well, there's only one person in the union. And so, I always think about that. We have a new contract negotiation. They better not say anything in the bathroom. Moving on. Company towns. Company towns would be towns that are owned by the company and scripts are company money. Instead of paying them in cash, you pay them in money from the company. And that's only good in company stores. And it's only good for the rent. So you can't use regular money and the script can't be used at a regular store. And so you can cut pay by just simply raising the rent in the company town. And this is a great way to control and dominate. These are done in a lot of places. China's infamous for this. Google has elements of this right now, but they're still done. But if you ever gone to Anaconda, the Anaconda copper company did that in Anaconda. Anaconda used to be a relatively big town for Montana. When I was your age, it was still a AA school. Now it's barely B. That's how much smaller it's become, class B. But if you've been in Anaconda, they have these little tiny white houses with row after row. Get my directions right. I think it's on the east side. So all these little tiny white, everyone's the same. Those are the company. They rent those out to the company workers, and they made you work there, and you only had to pay company script. So what a great way to cut wages. Just raise the rent. Raise prices in the company store. And then propaganda. They're bomb-throwing anarchists. And here's Uncle Sam telling a worker, don't go to the unions, they're anarchists. And as we all know, anybody who wants better working conditions wants anarchy. And so these are the ways they would do it. And I got to give you one strike. It's not even a strike, it's a lockout, but it puts all this together. It's called the Homestead Steal. We call it a strike even though it wasn't a strike. 1892, it adds almost all of this added together. Andrew Carnegie owned it. He wanted to break the union there. And he left it to a second in command, Henry Clay Frick. And so he's going to do a lockout, to break the Amalgamated Steelworkers Union, who negotiated slightly higher wages. That's it. They still only had Sundays off and 2 other holidays, 4th of July and Christmas. He wanted to break it because Carnegie didn't want the union to spread to other companies. And so lockout, what they did is they stockpiled steel, and then Frick organized surrounding the mill. Homestead is right outside of Pittsburgh. Surrounding the mill with barbed wire, brand new barbed wire, and then hiring Pinkertons. And they even had a new weapon for the Pinkertons called a Maxim gun. Anybody know what a Maxim gun is? It's the first machine gun. Jammed a lot, but the first machine gun. There are a lot of gun restrictions in the United States, but most of them were local. It was so new, there were no restrictions on that. And the Pinkertons in, and then they would protect, Scabs. And they bring in Scabs by boat. The thought was to avoid the workers, who also lived in the company town, and they were going to be kicked, and they kicked them out of the company town. They kick them out of the town. So, and all they have is script. So they're gonna starve. Well, they led to a shootout and over 100 people were wounded as workers tried to fight against the Pinkertons. But public sympathy was with the workers. And the governor didn't do what Frick wanted, send out the National Guard. I should add that Carnegie was in Scotland. He made sure he was out of the country so his hands wouldn't be dirty. So he could have this reputation of being the great philanthropist and not the guy trying to break the union for a couple cents lower pay a day. But then, as Frick was walking after a month of this lockout, and it looked like Frick's gonna vow to hold out, but it looked like they might have to give in. Frick. I just wrote Frick. And anarchists tried to assassinate him. Attacked Frick with a knife. Frick beat him off. But what did that turn into? Think about it for a second. What did that mean? Say it again.
Sympathy shifted towards Frick.
Exactly. And what did the union become? Bomb throwing anarchists. And it all turned. And once that happened, the National Guard were sent in. The government now sent in the National Guard. The lockout would be broken up. And the union was broken. They'd have to accept a pay cut. All the workers who led the union were blacklisted. Everyone was blacklisted. They could never get a job in that field again, or basically any job. And Carnegie, though, did feel guilty and had built an opera house for the workers. True story. One of the nicest opera houses in the world is the Pittsburgh Opera House. Was built because of Carnegie felt guilty about breaking the union and cutting their pay by a third. And so this became known as Carnivals of Revenge, capital versus labor. Oops, the wrong way. And the fear of socialism meant that capital government was always on the side of capital. There would be a couple of shifts though. Teddy Roosevelt was the first American president who tried to be a fair arbiter between the two. And then his cousin would be the first president in American history that would be pro-union. And things would change for 30 years. And almost 40% of all workers would be a member of the union, That would all die in the 1970s. So those are labor unions we had to get to. And so I'm going to start one more thing. No, we got to start new heading, the Gilded Age and Gilded Age politics. So this era, once again, we see a lot of politics that relate directly to this era. I know we're Belgarian, but I'm going to get to it because I'm going to. And we'll come to what's called the People's Party, populism. Now, the Gilded Age refers to Mark Twain, the great author, would write a book called The Gilded Age. And he talked about how it might seem like all this riches are being made, but it's illusionary. So many people are being left behind. So gilded means you have something that's covered with gold gild. So it looks good on the surface, but underneath, what is it? We don't know, and he said what. But there's a growing movement of people called populism. And this is a political reform by, now I put it in quotes, ordinary people. And they want to do something that they feel ignored by the elite. Now I'm saying here, because sometimes the ordinary people are actually the elite acting like ordinary people. Have you ever heard the term something, it's like grassroots? So it comes from the bottom up. A lot of times you get populist movements that are, they call them artificial turf. It's not really grass. It's wealthy, manipulative, very wealthy people trying to use the anger of regular people. Does this happen today? Yes, absolutely. This was a real populist movement, and it began on the farms, who felt they had no political representation, and they believed that we must either reform capitalism or else. And what is else? So tomorrow, very quickly, we'll go through the farmers' problems and then talk about philosophy. Sound good? Talked a lot today, didn't we? So what are you gonna remember on Friday? Bribes. Bribes. I gotta be honest with you, I haven't had a good bribe for this class in a very long time. And it's gonna start showing up on your permanent record. And what bribe am I looking for? I can pick that. That is probably the most stable currency. And so tomorrow, agrarian problems. We got far. I covered a lot. I'm gonna stop recording.